Okay, good evening, y'all. Welcome to our second EPIC training event of the academic year. I'm Julie Tennille. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the project director for the Education and Programming in Integrated Care program. And I'm shouting out a big thanks to our team behind the scenes, Wendy Myers, who is the program coordinator for this grant, and Ryan Brasa, who's our graduate assistant, who gets to ask some of the questions at the end of the webinar, and also to Sarah Fisher, who is our research assistant. We are incredibly excited about this presentation, and we'll introduce our speakers momentarily. But due to the size of the audience that the EPIC trainings bring in, we want you to know that we're going to monitor your questions from the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. And toward the end of the training event, Ryan will pose any outstanding questions to our presenters. Also, a reminder that the goal of this research and training grant from HRSA is to expand the numbers of well-trained MSW, MED school counseling, and PsyD professionals working with children, adolescents, and transitional aged youth in high need and high demand areas. And at this time, we would like for you to complete the pretest. So please scan the QR code that you see on this slide or check the chat box for the pretest link. And please also make sure that you do not exit the Zoom meeting or attempt to take the pretest more than once. And this should take about 3 or 4 minutes or so.
Julie, we have a class with EPIC students who are just getting in now because the guest speaker in their class got in late. So we may want to keep the pretest open just a couple more minutes to give them a chance to log in, please.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. For the students who just logged in from their class, the pretest is still open. You can scan it here with your phone, or you can use the link that's in the chat box. And you have to know that Dr. Tina rocks for letting us know you were coming late, so you can give her a big thanks.
Okay, so let me tell you about our amazing presenters for tonight. So Dr. Monique Howard is currently the Senior Director of Women's Health Initiatives in the Center of Global Women's Health at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, where the strategic priorities focus on social determinants of health and their impact on victimization, maternal morbidity and mortality, and gender-based health disparities. Please see the website for a much more extensive CV on this incredible scholar and leader. Shanna Williams is a doula, a mama, an educator, a licensed clinical social worker, and an advocate. When Shanna became a parent, she found she had to overcome challenges, including pregnancy loss, postpartum mood, and an anxiety disorder. Shanna carries on a legacy of birth work founded by the African American Grand Midwives by integrating holistic knowledge with clinical counseling, evidence-based research, and resource navigation skills to empower expectant families to achieve the birth, bonding, and postpartum experience they desire. Again, read on for more about this incredible human. We are grateful to you and look forward to tonight's presentation. So I am going to hide my slides and let you share your slides now.
Hey,
Can you see my slides?
yes, we
Can you see
can.
them? Great, perfect.
Yes.
Uh,
I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This is a subject that Dr. Howard and I are very excited about. And so we are looking forward to talking more about this. I do want to just open up with a disclaimer I was just sharing. I am having a little bit of tech issues. So if you notice I freeze a bit, I'll be right back and we'll complete what I said. But I also want to be thoughtful around the fact that for many of us, this is a really emotionally charged topic. And so please be mindful to take care of yourself, notice what's happening in your body, what kind of thoughts and emotions are coming up for you related to this, and think about ways to take care of yourself as we talk about this topic. If we could proceed to the next slide, Dr. Howard.
Sure.
Briefly, just to go over our learning objectives again, we're going to spend some time talking about the sexual and developmental health needs of adolescents, and we're going to interpret the history of abortion rights via the framework of reproductive justice. We're going to talk about some of the effects of the Dobbs decision on adolescent sexual health, and also strategies related to advocacy. Okay. So for our introduction, we want to take a little bit of time. We know that you're able to read our bios, but we want to reorient you all a little bit just to where we are specifically on this issue. And we're going to start with an introduction where we'll talk about who we are, what we are, where we are, when we are, and how we are as it relates to this topic. So Dr. Howard, I would like you to start.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Julie and Wendy, for finding us and allowing us to have a conversation that is so incredibly important. And so who am I? Particularly in the landscape that we're in right now, I'm a hardworking, kind, inquisitive, and always learning student. And now I'm a student of, as you heard briefly in my bio, issues around how people live and moving them toward how people live healthier. I am as you heard, the Senior Director of Women's Health Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, but sometimes, and most times, more importantly, I'm a mom of 2 adolescent girls. They are 15 and 17 years old. And so I'm wrapped up in this reproductive justice conversation very differently than other people, because when I think about college choice and university choice, because that's where we are right now, is I'm in this college mode. Where can my daughters go to college? And if by chance, either one of them become pregnant and they make whatever decision that they are going to make, does the state that they are seeking their education in support the decision that they've made? Or do they have to rely on this relationship that I think that we have in my head? Oh, I can tell mommy anything, and call me up and tell me that they are pregnant and this is the decision that they've made, and how can I support them? And in there also is I'm a soother, wanting to make things better for my family, for my community, and for people. Where am I right now at the University of Pennsylvania? I'm sitting in my office in the School of Nursing. I am on Lenni Lenape land, and I want to pay homage to my ancestors, and particularly the women or the females, the women before me that have had decisions to make around reproductive justice and either survived the decision or did not survive the decision. And the decisions that we make and the conversations that we have, and when I think about when am I, is participating in this multifaceted conversation and what it all means. And then finally, I'm really frustrated with how we are, where we are right now in the conversation about abortion access. I cannot fundamentally understand how we got here for two reasons. One, I, like many people in my generation, thought we were done, and therefore didn't receive information from the generations before me that really did the fighting. So I feel unprepared. And also I just don't understand why, and this is my naivete, I'm sure, why reproductive justice, why abortion access is on political platforms when vasectomies are not, and how, my vagina and my uterus and cervix can get a person elected, but no one talks about vestefrons and penises as a political platform. And so that is frustrating for me, how clearly someone, an entity, want to return women to where they were when women were not allowed to have their own bank accounts and credit cards and make decisions about their health and well-being. So that's a little bit more about Monique Howard. Shanna?
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard. And so I'm really appreciating what you shared. And as I think about who I am, I really am thinking a lot about how I embody in the world as a mental health provider and a birth worker, and the way that I have been able to integrate those aspects of my knowledge base together to serve both client families, but also to serve the professionals who work with them as a consultant, and to continue to do research in this area as a doctoral candidate. And I'm really, really relishing in that as I think about this information. And when I reflect on what I am, I'm a parent, birth giver, an aunt, a sister, a friend, a spiritual person who identifies very much as a healer as it relates to emotional well-being. But through all of those things, I see myself first and foremost as a Black woman, having the unique experience of being an African American in the United States. And so where I am today is different than where I was some years back, when I would do presentations and when I would do workshops, I was very careful to think about, I'm talking about sexuality education and working with adolescents and their families was where I started in my career. And I talked to people who serve them. And I thought a lot about how people felt, and I held back a lot of what I said. But to be honest, where I am today is I can no longer be neutral. And I'm grounded firmly in a reproductive justice framework as it relates to how I feel about this topic. While I can respect people's individual decision, I think when we are looking at everyone in the United States, we have to be thinking about what reproductive justice looks like for all. And we're going to talk more about that this evening. When I'm most passionate about this subject is usually when people assume my position. Because in my early work, I was working with teens around sexual health and sexual education, people assumed I had one position related to reproductive health, justice, and abortion access. And now my work really centers Black women who have experienced perinatal loss and infertility and are now pregnant and are carrying a desperately wanted child. And I can relate to much of their experiences, which is why I do the work that I do. And people often assume that means that I would not have any opinion or I would be against this issue. But I often have to remind folks very passionately when I do that the legal aspects and the medical aspects that impact everyday lives of people who experience pregnancy loss and people who are receiving fertility treatment is grounded in the decisions around Roe v. Wade and the ongoing decisions from that point. And so again, neutrality is a choice that I cannot make. And I also want to mention that my work still to this day often includes adolescents and transition age youth as I do this work. We often forget about them when we think about pregnancy loss or we think about fertility challenges, but they are also experiencing those things. And how am I? Much like what you said, Dr. Howard, I'm still a bit shocked that we are here. I cannot believe that. And if you wouldn't mind advancing us to the next slide, I want to spend a little time talking to other folks who might still be in that state of shock, much like I am, right? For me, and for many people, we are aware of the issues of reproductive health, but we often don't think about, excuse me while I plug in my charger, we often don't think about the ways in which this is constantly happening and things are constantly changing. And so in 2018, this decision really started brewing in a way that folks who are very focused on abortion rights were paying attention to. But for the rest of us, we heard about a draft leak, and then it seemed like the next thing we knew, we were in this situation. So we want to take a little bit of a step back and provide some context to what has actually happened so that we can think about where we want to start. Next slide, please. And so the Dobbs decision is a way that people are referring to the case of Dobbs versus Jackson. And this quote here is from Justice Sotomayor, who talks about the fact that for over 50 years, this has been an issue that has been brought up, and people have talked about why they feel we should continue to move in a direction that supports Roe v. Wade. But now it's being brought up again, and it's obviously because of the recent changes in the Supreme Court. And when are we going to see this as just a political act, was the comment that was made. So Dobbs is actually the name of Thomas Dobbs, who is the state health officer at the Mississippi State Department of Health. It's probably a little more nuanced than this, but he has said multiple times, anytime there is something that's related to medical health that's brought before the court system in the state of Mississippi, my name has to be there. I don't really have a horse in this fight, but my name has to represent it. And unfortunately, the furor is being focused on me, but this is really about the state of Mississippi. Jackson refers to the Jackson Women's Health Organization. This organization is the only abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi. And it was actually the focus of a very critically acclaimed documentary that we'll revisit a bit later on. But the reason why it got such attention was, first of all, it's the only abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi, but also they provide abortion care up to 15 weeks gestation. And that matters for a few reasons. So if we go back to think about the 1973 decision of Roe v. Wade, what the Supreme Court said, and I encourage you to look more deeply into this, I'm summarizing it in a very short amount of time, but essentially they said that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution means that we have a fundamental right for women to have privacy in obtaining an abortion, right? And that laws that a state might make individually could deprive a person from life, liberty, and property without due process. So essentially it's grounded in a civil rights concept, that due process is something that would inhibit people's ability to be able to have privacy related to obtaining an abortion as needed if we leave it to the states. But there was another decision that was overturned by Dobbs versus Jackson that isn't being discussed as much. That's important to understand why the Jackson Women Health Organization is held up in this way related to this case. In 1992, in the state of Pennsylvania, there was a case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And this was a landmark case. First of all, the court decided that it was going to uphold Roe v. Wade, but it also said that states, in particular at that time, Pennsylvania had put forth 5 different provisions that they wanted to be specific to people who were going to get an abortion, that they had to meet the criteria of these 5 provisions. And the Supreme Court at that time said that those provisions placed an undue burden on people who were trying to obtain an abortion. Most importantly of those provisions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of them tonight, but one of them was requiring that people could not have an abortion beyond the point of fetal viability. The courts listed that that was determined to be within 23 to 24 weeks gestation. So prior to that, the fetus at that point was not considered viable. And so people who would seek abortions at that point should be able to access them beyond the point of viability. States could decide if that what kind of clauses they wanted to put in place. So for example, some states said if the case of rape or incest, then it would be okay. But each state made that decision. But before that point of viability, people had to have access. So what happened was, if you could proceed to the next slide, Dr. Howard, in the Dobbs versus Jackson decision, in March 2018, the Mississippi legislation put forward a 15-week abortion ban, which is before that 23-week period. But they said, we are putting this forward because we want to say that any abortion after 15 weeks should not happen in our state. And the Mississippi governor signed that into law. And as they did that, one of the comments that was made by one of the senators was, we're probably going to get sued within a half hour of doing this. And they were. They were sued by the Center for Reproductive Rights, which represented the Jackson Women Health Clinic, who again provides abortions up to that 16-week. So the federal district court temporarily blocked that law, but they continue to push this forward in the court system, and people like organizations like Heartbeat International and other organizations in favor of upholding this law put forward their support. And oral arguments were heard before the Supreme Court in 2021 about this case. So again, this has been brewing for 2 years. It takes much longer than it would on Law and Order, right, to go through a court process like this. But in May, a draft of the opinion from the Supreme Court was leaked. And so the news media caught hold that 5 of these justices were voting in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, because by saying that this could be upheld in Mississippi essentially would overturn not just Roe v. Wade, but also that Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision. And on June 24th, it came out officially that the U.S. Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade and overturn the Casey decision. Next slide, please. So when people thought about this, they really focused a lot of their feelings about whether they were for or against the decision towards the Trump administration. But what we know is that this did not start with the Trump administration. So as Dr. Howard and I thought about, how did we get here? And why is it important to know how we could make a difference? We have to look at the history of what occurred. And so I am going to share this clip from CBS Morning that looks at that. I do want to just give a disclaimer that there is probably going to be a commercial played at the beginning of this. We don't know what that commercial is going to be. We don't support or have any connection in our presentation to that commercial, but just disregard that. And then when the clip starts, you'll be able to tell because you'll see the newscasters sharing. So when you're able to stop share, Dr. Howard, then I will share my screen. Hold on one moment. I want to make sure that I shared sound when I did that.
Speaking about BJ's low gas prices.
Can you hear?
BJ's, absurdly sinful savings.
We're going to continue our coverage of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, this follows nearly half a century of conflict and a concerted campaign by anti-abortion groups. Long before this weekend's protest, we have seen violence against abortion clinics and the providers, too, and frequently vicious, and vicious is the word, harassment of women seeking abortions. There has also been a relentless effort to change the landscape politically in Congress, legislatures, and the courts. Jan Crawford takes a look at how we got here.
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
In 1973, Roe v. Wade was a bombshell.
The anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
4 states had only recently passed laws legalizing some form of abortion, while 13 others had begun allowing it with restrictions. By stepping in to make abortion legal nationwide, some justices at the time hoped the decision would end the debate over abortion rights. But the anti-abortion rights movement mobilized almost immediately, beginning first at the grassroots level.
This is the first March for Life, and that was a year exactly after Roe came down. Exactly.
Jeannie Mancini is president of March for Life.
The march has grown younger and bigger almost every single year.
How important has it been to have that yearly reminder that we're still here?
I can't think of a more symbolic picture of Roe not being settled law than seeing the growing number of marchers.
That social movement became more strategic in 1992.
Today, 3 Reagan-Bush appointees stabbed the pro-life movement in the back.
The Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe by a 5-4 vote until a last-minute switch by Justice Anthony Kennedy, who joined fellow Republican nominees Sandra Day O'Connor and David Souter to save it.
That moment in 1992 was deeply disappointing. It also helped me understand how much we could depend upon Republicans.
Which is how much?
Which is not much. That was the point where we realized unless we strengthen this political arm at the center of the movement, we will continue to lose.
Within months, Marjorie Dannenfelser, who's been called the woman who killed Roe, founded that political organization, Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America.
Every time there was a devastating blow, the pro-life movement grew. That is the mark of a successful movement.
The next devastating blow came in the 2000s.
I would welcome a circumstance where there was such a consensus in this country that we said we don't want to have abortion in this country at all. But that's not where we are.
When Dannenfelser said Republicans paid lip service to the movement and lost the presidency twice.
We said, no way is this ever going to happen again. We're going to reward our friends, punish our political enemies.
In 2014, the group helped defeat several pro-abortion rights senators from battleground states, and in 2016 got assurances from Donald Trump.
The justices that I'm going to appoint will be pro-life. They will have a conservative bent.
And that is why we are here today talking about the overturn of Roe versus Wade.
Activists on the left joined in the fight, arguing abortion bans put lives in danger and pouring millions of dollars into recruiting and supporting candidates. But this court decision has some admitting they've fallen short.
This is a concerted, coordinated effort. And yes, they're winning.
A conservative legal movement spent the decades since Roe promoting politicians and legal scholars who believed it was not the role of judges to create new rights in the Constitution, including abortion rights. President Trump succeeded in nominating 3 to the Supreme Court.
I'm very proud that Roe versus Wade is now gone.
I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime.
You didn't think it would?
It's a total historic moment in our country's history. And yet, it's not, as I said, it's not the end.
Now, as for that next step, there's a plan to take the fight to the state legislatures to continue to push for more restrictions, even at the federal level, a prohibition on those mail-order abortion pills.
Well, you know, Jen, we all had a heads up with that leaked draft, but I thought it was interesting that you said last half hour that even though we had the heads up, people on both sides were surprised. It didn't matter where you stood, you were surprised. It was sort of jaw-dropping no matter what you felt. Why do you think we were so surprised?
I just think Roe has been with us for a generation or more of women, and the court came so close to overturning it in 1992, fell 1 vote short. Many people thought the issue was over. And so I think there was some complacency. And the question now is, because people were surprised, what does that mean for these women? You know, the states that are most likely to ban abortion or restrict abortion are states where women are in most need. So what are the programs there for these women? Obviously, the anti-abortion groups say they're working, their programs are already in place in a number of states. Governors, we saw Governor Nome on Face the Nation yesterday saying she has a website trying to get resources for pregnant women who no longer can access abortion. Are those programs going to be enough? Are they going to work? Are we, the media and others, going to continue the focus on these women who right now, don't have the health care they need before the decision on Friday?
Yeah, Jen, picking up on the subject of surprise, you've covered personally the Supreme Court for almost 30 years. You've got a best-selling book on the topic. There are a few people more authoritative. You've interviewed 4 or 5 justices sitting on the court now. Did anything in this process surprise you?
No. I mean, as we saw in the piece, there's been an orchestrated campaign to try to get more conservative judges on the courts that have conservative legal philosophies, and that's what they've done. I mean, these judges believe that you read the Constitution very narrowly. Liberal judges believe you should read it more expansively. And so I think the writing was on the wall, and that's why Republicans have spent so much effort trying to get the Senate. And here's what the result was today, or Friday.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
All right, Jan, thank you very much. More to come for sure.
What really stood out to me in that video was that this is, again, a concentrated strategic effort that has been happening since immediately after Roe v. Wade passed. And I thought it was also very interesting that they talked about that as a movement, we reward our friends and punish our enemies, even if they are in the same political party. And so I think, if nothing else, that speaks to the real strategy around getting the feelings that they had about Roe v. Wade met and aligned with the Supreme Court. I'm wondering, Monique, for you, what was your reaction when we watched that film for the first time?
You know, a couple of things came out again for me. When I see this, the young woman said, "I have less abortion rights than my mom." There was a sign that one of the young people were holding in protest. And that means a lot. You know, again, as I said earlier, particularly since I still can't figure out why we're talking about abortion and people's decisions around managing their family. And I'll talk a lot more around what reproductive justice really is and its definition. But, you know, we don't have milk on the shelves, formula to feed the babies that are already here. And we're already in a panic around feeding the babies that are here. In 2019, in the United States, there were upwards of 600,000 abortions that were performed. And that is 2019, we're in 2022. What is the number going to be? That's 1.2 million people that are parented potentially. If it's a 2-family household, the children Are the corporations ready for that many people to take family leave for 3 to 4 months? We know that we already don't have formula. What else will we run out of as a nation? And who is this decision really for, and who was it supposed to impact, and what was that impact supposed to be? I feel like it's a setup, right? So what does this decision really mean for birthing people and for birthing people's family? And I don't know if we can determine what that answer is today, but I'm scared. You know, I'm scared because I look at morbidity, mortality in women of color, and how that potentially will increase exponentially when there are more children to carry. So it's a lot. So I feel like it's overwhelming.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I think it would be good for us to move forward and then talking about looking at reproductive health through a reproductive justice framework and why that's so important when we think about adolescence.
Sure. Let's see if I can move this forward. So that's great. So what is reproductive justice? So what is the definition? Where did that come from? Who coined the phrase? And is it just around choice, right? So, you know, I'll read the definition together. You know, it's the right to decide whether or not you want to have children or not, or want to have children or not. The right to parent children in healthy environments. The right to self-autonomy, sexual autonomy, and gender freedom. So am I going to have children? Am I not? Where am I birthing those children and raising them? And the freedom to make the decisions for yourself, right? It's a contemporary framework for activism and for thinking about the experience of reproduction. So it really allows individuals, particularly women of color, Indigenous women, to think about the experience of reproduction and their role. It's a political movement that splices rights with social justice to achieve reproductive justice. So it's the combination of the two. The term is being used a lot now because it's around justice and choice. It's not just about the rights of the children, it's about the rights of the birthing family. It's a human right, reproductive justice, to maintain body autonomy, have children or not, parent children where we want to, particularly in a safe, sustainable communities. And that's the overall arching definition. It was coined by an organization, or along with an organization called Sister Song. Sister Song is located in Atlanta. It's a Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, formed in 1997 by 16 organizations that were women of color organizations. And then the many communities that were a part of that are Native Americans, African Americans, Latina, Asian American. And they recognize the rights and responsibilities to represent themselves and their communities, right? So it was about women gathering to ensure that their choice and their voice were heard in the reproductive justice battleground, in the abortion access battleground, right? And as I said, it was an opportunity for the national lifting or uplifting of the needs of the most marginalized women, families, and communities. And that is who will be greatly impacted by the Dobbs-Jackson and the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Our communities of color, women, families as well. Loretta Ross was one of the pioneers of reproductive justice movement, as she was leading Sister Song at the time. This is a landmark book. So later on, we'll get to what can I do now? This book is one of the what to do now. It provides you with a history and a historical context of the justice movement around reproduction. And so it should be and can be available on our bookshelves as we continue, as we prepare for the next layer of the fight and what this fight means. And so I talked about the contemporary framework. All fertile persons and persons who reproduce and become parents require a safe and dignified context for these most fundamental human experiences, right? And so in the grand scheme of things, it is it's lending your voice to this movement and ensuring that your voice is heard. And that's the movement that I saw again in the video clip this time around, and in most uprisings. It's the voice of the youth that we will be relying on for this next phase of this fight and this struggle. Right? And so what is a healthy sustainable family, right? Where those resources come from, they come from community-based organizations. And we can see that depending upon who's in office and how much we owe and how much support we give to our millionaires, our billionaires, and our corporations, that community-based organizations and resources are the first place where cuts are made. And so therefore, there is a dearth of or a decrease in high quality healthcare, in housing and education, in ensuring that people make a living wage and live in a healthy environment, and a safety net for when these resources fail. And I think that one of the things that were very telling in a time that we can really resonate with is COVID. And COVID really demonstrated to many people that high quality healthcare does not exist in all communities. If you didn't know that before, COVID certainly showed you that. And that housing and education, that there are definitely disparities in housing and education. We are still struggling for a living wage, for a minimum wage that's a living wage. In Philadelphia, you know, it's still $7 and change. In order to have 2 children and have a living wage and housing and education, you have to make $30 an hour in order for that to happen. And we're struggling to move, you know, our minimum wage up to where it's livable. We know that we don't live in a healthy environment because of what's going on with, you know, with climate control and climate change. Although there are folks and factions that are trying to deny it. And therefore, all of that together, right, all of those determinants of health and well-being and healthy outcomes, there are limited resources for people to go for a safety net. And so the last basic claim that reproductive justice makes is that all of that should be a fundamental human right, right? It is not a fundamental human right. It is still choice. And so, you know, when we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and for this instance, particularly in the book, there are 8 fundamental human rights: civil rights, political rights, economic, social, cultural, environmental, developmental, and sexual rights, right? And we posit that undergirding reproductive justice and its intersectionality with these inalienable human rights creates a powerful impact important to everybody's life, right? That we need these 8 rights and our ability to make choices about our family in order to have positive impact and positive outcomes on our lives. Okay. And so reproductive justice, as it says, is much bigger than just advocating for choice, right? It's advocating for, it's more than choice, it's access. You know, one of the things that I've read recently is, you know, reproductive justice and abortion access is the umbrella under which people's diverse thoughts and opinions about abortion can exist, right? And so there are always going to be some people that getting an abortion is a no-no. It's not a decision for them. And there's going to be some people that, you know, getting an abortion is the decision that they made for their family. And both of those decisions, although it has been created so that we could be so incredibly polarized, but both of those decisions fit underneath the umbrella of choice and absolutely fit underneath the umbrella of reproductive justice. So really quickly, the problem with choice versus rights. And one of the things that Shanna said earlier is that, you know, there are several constitutional rights, and abortion doesn't fit in the Constitution. It doesn't fit securely and snugly in the 14th Amendment. And that's what the struggle is at this moment, right? It doesn't fit snugly. However, what we also have to be aware of is the other issues and the other choice that we exercise. Some of those don't fit under the 14th Amendment or the Constitution as well. Voting, Black people and voting, LGBTQIA rights, marriage equality, as well as interracial marriage, right? Those are some other things that don't fit under, you know, nice. So you know, we heard that there are some people that take the Constitution literally, and some that are expanding upon it for the where we are today in this world. One of my concerns was this movement is scary. And I said to people, I'm not quite sure in November, will I be able to vote one way or the other on this issue or for any elected officials? Because if this is the direction, then as a Black woman, I don't know how much longer I'll have the ability to vote in any upcoming elections. Or, you know, thinking of my grandmother or my great-grandmother, will I have a bank account? Will I be able to have a credit card? Because those are rights that we have now, a choice that aren't written in this document that people are taking so incredibly literally. And will they go away? And what happens if they do? And who's going to fight for me, right? Because right now the people that are fighting for me and with me look like me. And will there be a commitment from people to fight for me if my voice is taken away? Right. And so, you know, this will also impact, as we look at choice versus rights more, the continual decreasing or elimination of reproductive justice makes it impossible for women to make decisions that are in the best interest of their family and their community. Women of color will not, or who cannot afford to travel for an abortion, are most at risk for losing their lives and the livelihoods to abortion bans. And so, you know, as we see, and later on I'll have a map that kind of speaks to it. We're troubled, right? We're troubled in these times. And we need to do our yeoman's job of educating ourselves around Roe v. Wade and what it means moving forward. Shanna, this is you.
Okay, you can proceed to the next slide. Okay, so this is just further emphasizing that choosing to parent or not to parent is reproductive justice, indeed. You can move forward to the next slide. And so we're looking at the ways in which folks are responding to this decision. one of the things that we noted was that the center of the Dobbs decision really was around this organization in Jackson, Mississippi. And so what I'd like to do is show the trailer from this film so you can see some of the work that was being done and how, when we think about the impact of this decision, how it might impact some of the folks in this film. So Monique, when you're able to stop sharing, let me see if I can pull this right on up. Sorry, everyone, a little tile. Here we go. I want to ask you to tell me if you are able to hear this. Get big.
What a great day it was here in the city of Jackson, Mississippi. We can present to God the first abortion-free state.
Tonight, we travel to the last abortion clinic in Mississippi.
The state requires us to do some very specific things, but I think some of the information I'm required to tell you is designed to discourage you from deciding to have an abortion.
Governor Phil Bryant signed what's known as a trap law.
We want Mississippi to be abortion-free.
Some of the people who judge you for making this very important decision would have a fit if someone tried to control their lives in the same way.
They're called crisis pregnancy centers, a key part of the anti-abortion agenda.
Women are made to protect and to guard and to die for their babies.
I got pregnant when I was 16, and I made myself drink a whole bunch of Clorox and water, and I bled through. And all I would have had 6 kids.
This is your baby right here. You want one with hi mom on it?
I don't think you can withhold sex education from people and then also withhold the option for abortion.
There's like a 20% failure rate of condoms.
If a condom's used correctly, it's 98% effective.
Oh, I don't believe that.
This is an issue that predominantly affects poor Black women.
This clinic stays open. This clinic stays open.
Your Honor, we're talking about the Mississippi state law.
We have got to take shame out of the word abortion.
I can't say that we're pro-life until we take action on it.
The state's only abortion clinic vandalized.
If something happens here, something happens to this staff, I feel responsible for all this shit.
Just keep wanting it to get easier.
Man, fill you up with kids if you don't give a fuck about damn one of them.
What you are doing is premeditated murder.
In November, I want you to vote as if women's lives depend on it, because they will.
I believe in abortion because no woman should have to feel the way that I felt.
A very, very powerful film. Get the opportunity to see it. And so again, thinking about a post-Roe world where people are considering permanent birth control procedures, is that available to everyone? When we think about the young woman at the center of this film in the trailer, she's an adolescent, right? What is available to her? Next slide, please. Okay. And so just reflect on this, this map, which is reflecting on the legal status of abortion now that it is left to the states. To just take that information in. If you will go to the next slide, please. Right, and this is where it is currently legal, but in some states, there's also still some limitations on that. And so in thinking about reproductive justice, the information that we received about that, thinking about the lives of people like that young woman at the center of the film in Jackson, thinking about what this looks like state to state, let's start to think a little bit more about adolescents overall and how this experience of the Dobbs decision is impacting them. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to be thoughtful. I would like you to be thoughtful just around the fact that research talking about youth, which I'm using to encompass both teens and transition age youth, can span anywhere from, some researchers talk about adolescents starting at 10 years old. Some talk about transition age youth being up to age 26. That is a span of over 15 years, right? So there are a variety of different experiences that youth might be experiencing. And it's important to understand that a wide range of experiences is still normative for these young folks. And also keep in mind that age doesn't necessarily dictate experience. There are some people who at the age of 14 might have had significant life challenges or experiences in which they might be in a place where they may be mature or have more of a larger world understanding than someone who's 24. And so we're being very general in applying this across youth, but reflect on the youth you know in your life, maybe the youth that you serve. I'm not going to go into too much detail around youth sexual development because I imagine many of you have probably had a human development class, or you have probably done some work around just understanding in general, how do people develop? But I do want to talk about just an understanding so we're all on the same page of what happens when youth are developing in their sexuality, which encompasses more than just sexual behaviors, right? I'm going to talk about it from the framework that social workers commonly use, which is the biopsychosocial framework. Some people extend that also to biopsychospiritual social framework. When we look at a biological, a psychological, and a social framework, we're not looking at those things as separate. We see them as interconnected, one impacting the other, and none of them are more important than the other when we understand how adolescents develop. So if you would click the slide for me, we'll talk a little bit about biological changes in youth. So when we think about early adolescence, right, those early teens, we're thinking about there's rapid growth and change around puberty and body changes. This can create body image issues. And so youth are a little more, at this point, are pretty focused on how they look and if they feel okay about that. Think about that in the context of trans youth, right, and how they might feel about their body image. It's also important to know that even in early adolescence, sexual and sensual pleasure is now being intentionally sought out. For example, that might look like masturbation. Masturbation occurs far before adolescence for people. That can be a very normative experience, but being intentional about seeking out that sort of pleasure, either with yourself or with other people, it starts to happen around when people have that agency that they start to develop in early adolescence. I'm just saying that also because sometimes when we think about things like abortion rights and contraceptive rights, reproductive justice, people want to point the finger at young people and say, just stop, control that, keep it in your pants, stop doing that sort of thing. You shouldn't be so boy crazy or girl crazy. But this is a natural human drive that happens as part of evolution. And we don't tell adults to do the same thing. So just to put that in context. You could click that button again for me. We'll look a little bit at psychological. So all of these changes in, excuse me, let me take a moment. Let me finish biological for middle adolescence. At this point, middle adolescents are starting to have an increased interest in how they look. That sex drive is starting to emerge and it starts to be part of who they are. Again, remember, there's a wide range of normative, but they're understanding a desire and being intentional around addressing that. And then by late adolescence, that physical growth and body changes are starting to slow down a bit. There's greater acceptance of physical self and improved body image, but we know that often body image challenges can transition into adulthood. And someone just noted that the slides are not changing.
It's just the addition of the word at the bottom. So that slide didn't change, but the added psychological did change. So that came up.
We'll
Yeah.
challenge the slides.
We're good. You can continue. We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So from a psychological perspective, in early adolescence, these young teens, as these body changes are happening, they start to have more concerns about their body appearance, but they're also starting to worry about what's normal. Am I normal? And at that same time, they're developing that sense of identity and autonomy, figuring out who they are. And it's really important for them at this point to start to get age-appropriate sexuality information about what's happening with their body and reproduction and healthy relationships. They're also really looking at the media and what's on TV and music. And so building critical thinking skills can really be important. And starting an open and honest dialogue can really be helpful for youth at this point to understand how to make sense of everything. By middle adolescence, youth want their parents to be less involved or their caregivers to be less involved if that is something that they have parents who are trying to be involved in that point. And that includes in relationships. A lot of focus starts to be around peer relationships, and they are really trying to deal with peer pressure. So parents or caregivers and adults who are working with youth want to be thinking about how do we provide guidance around encouraging independence while setting clear boundaries, but also thinking about how can we intervene and provide guidance around what healthy relationships look like and what healthy sexual relationships look like according to our family and our organizations and communities' values. By late adolescence, they start to move a little bit out of peer groups being important, but I do want to reflect on that earlier clip when we looked at what was happening with the Roe v. Wade movement. And the woman talked about the anti-abortion movements are really growing and they're getting larger and younger every year. And so by middle adolescence, people are starting to form some of these ideas about how they feel about values and decision-making. And their peer groups remain important, but they start to be more open to considering another point of view outside of their peer group by late adolescence. And their decision values are started to be more based on those own burgeoning values and beliefs versus just what their peers say. It's also important to know when we think about psychological development that teens, about 1 in 7 youth would qualify to be diagnosed with a mental health disorder. Depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders are among the leading diagnoses that these young folks are getting. Suicide is a 4th leading cause of death among youth. The consequences of not addressing these issues and just attributing them to wild hormones or teenagers pushing boundaries, instead of saying maybe there's a mental health need here that we could support, it actually can extend into adulthood and create more problems as we start to think about going into adulthood and maybe in planning for a wanted pregnancy at that point. And lastly, from a social perspective, I want to talk a little bit about that they might be in early adolescence really comparing themselves to their peers, really wanting to explore independence in dating relationships. And by middle adolescence, again, they want that increased need for privacy. And parent and caregivers might talk about feeling pushed aside as the focus is more on those romantic relationships and friendships. They can start to develop these feelings of love and desire, which is exciting and might lead to decision-making around even forming a family. But it can also be stressful for young people to have such intense emotion around relationships. Again, they really benefit from being able to see in their social environment modeling characteristics of healthy relationships. Is that available to all youth? Is a big question we have to think about as providers. By late adolescence, romantic relationships are typically at higher level of importance than maybe peer and even family relationships. And so people are starting to establish a sense of who they are and what they want. Sexual activity is pretty common by late adolescence or moving into like that transition age. And so this is where people might be in a relationship. They may become pregnant unintentionally and now might make a decision even separate from their partner. What support might we have in place for them? So if you're able to progress to the next slide, we can start to think about where are some of the concerns, particularly as we think about all of that knowledge around development, looking at it from a framework of reproductive justice. Where are the health issues that really are coming to the surface? You could go ahead and click this slide. Let's see, hopefully folks can see it. Let us know if you're not able to. So a lower social status for young folks. Even though there is this belief that the world is focused on youth, the truth is that ageism really impacts adolescents. Teen parents are more likely to experience increased amount of social stigma and essentially be told or get the message that they're not able to think for themselves and for their children, whether it's an overt message or subtly. We know also that they fall into categories related to social status that might increase the likelihood that they are going to have more mental and emotional health challenges related to just navigating life around reproductive health. So that could include what education levels their parents have, if there's a history of child support, abuse, if there's limited social networks, which happens often during teen pregnancy, if there's chaotic or unstable home environments in low-income communities. And in addition, teen parents are more likely to experience intense stress that can increase their risk for mental health disorders. Often when we think about perinatal mental health, which is a specific field of mental health that really requires ongoing and additional training to support, and we think often about the fact that there's not many supports specifically focused on the mental health of teens around these issues. I want to also point out that if you do have an abortion, you still can develop postpartum or during your pregnancy, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, because your body responds as if you are pregnant, and not having good support systems for teens around that is a problem. And additionally, young women and girls, or people who are birth givers, or people who are able to conceive a baby, are disproportionately affected because of the stigma around their role. They often are getting the blame or the stigma placed solely on them, more so than their partners as it relates to reproductive health. If you click the slide again, lack of autonomy is coming up, right? So that discussion around choice versus rights is really important, because the rights might exist legally, maybe in the state where they are, but do youth have these choices available to them? Many of you might remember, or might still be in a place where even to get your social security card from your parents, you have to ask a couple of times because they've kept it, right? So documentation, health insurance, what's your living conditions, those things really impact youth, and even transition age youth, particularly in the United States. We think about adolescence as a social construct in which there's no clear marker. So some people who might be in their early 20s are still maybe living at home and navigating a little bit of parental over autonomy, instead of maybe being able to act in their full self, right? Again, there's also teens who are younger and are having to take responsibility for things that they shouldn't have to. So there's a range of experiences. But even in that instance, we know that the way that states and medical care providers offer autonomy around choices can really vary. The age of consent varies in states, and the age of consent usually is applied in many areas, but not often in abortion access, which I'll talk about in a bit. If you could click the slide again. Denial of access to information. We know that there's a major issue around lack of comprehensive sex education, as the nurse was speaking to in the Jackson trailer. And so additionally, when youth are meeting with their providers, their medical care providers, there is research to support that medical care providers often talk about they don't feel comfortable providing accurate and appropriate sexual health information to adolescents and transition age youth in the same way they would their adult patients. You click the slide again. Thinking about, again, choice versus rights. Certain services adolescents don't have access to. So there's existing barriers, particularly around abortion, that can be insurmountable already, even prior to the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Casey decision. So for example, in Indiana, minors had to get consent for an abortion by their parent that was notarized. They also have to get in-person state-directed counseling, an ultrasound, and an 18-month waiting period. So we already know, or research tells us, that youth are more likely to seek out abortions at a later term in their pregnancy than adults who might have more access and awareness of what's happening with their bodies. These sort of restrictions end up creating a denial to access of services if there's state limitations around how soon you can get an abortion. Also, I just want to point out too, access to services related to mental health might not be an option as well. If there's an insurance issue, is there services available that treat the needs of teens? For example, we've worked with, in my organization, worked with a young woman who was seeking counseling support around experiencing an abortion. Well, there was a grief group for teens that she was referred to, but she talked about being in there with people who had lost their grandparents or had lost a friend to community violence. And she certainly didn't feel comfortable talking about her experience of having an abortion. But being in a group that's for adults who had experienced an abortion would not match her experience either, and she would also feel uncomfortable. This is the denial of access to services because there's none really appropriate for youth. Could click this slide again. Vulnerability to violence and exploitation is important in thinking about the way that young people experience their reproductive health care. We know that youth are at very high risk to have experienced sexual violence. And we also know that those experiences put them at increased risk of being re-victimized as an adult. And it also contributes to their experiences of medical care, like birth or abortion care. They're more likely to have that experience be a traumatic experience. When I think about some of my clients who have gone to receive abortion care services, even under legal circumstances, walking through a line of protesters who yell and scream and physically threaten them, having providers who might speak to them in a manner that they feel very stigmatized and disrespected. We know that youth who are youth of color experience that at higher rates than their white counterparts. That can contribute to experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress related to reproductive health care. If you could click the slide one more time. Thank you. They're being told that it still says youth reproductive health issues. So again, maybe stopping the share and then restarting it might help. Go ahead.
Yes, the people are absolutely correct. There is a woman there holding a baby with red hair, and it says reproductive health issues. Are they then not seeing the addition of low social status, lack of autonomy, denial of access to information? So the left side, the right side of the slide remained the same.
Yeah.
And the left side, yes, the left side has stayed the same picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so Wendy is saying the slide is continuing, words are being added, but the picture is the same. Correct. Okay.
Okay. And it looks like some people can see the changes. So
yes.
Technology is wonderful until it's not. And then you're like, what happened there? So the last thing that was added was restrictive governmental policies. And that really is looking at things like parental involvement laws, like what we talked about in Indiana, where you have to get parental consent. It is actually pretty common for youth to involve their parents and caregivers in their decisions around abortion care. But when they don't, there usually is a very good reason why they don't, usually involving some sort of fear of retribution or abuse or consequences for what they are experiencing. This is something that impacts reproductive health issues around not just abortion, but also contraceptive access. So we could move to the next slide. And maybe what we could do is you could just go ahead and click a couple times until the slide is complete. And then if folks are not able to see it, we could stop and restart the share, and then they'll be able to see everything. Yep, that's it. Okay, so let me know in the chat if you're able to see them. I'm going to read what's there. So these are particular areas of advocacy that we need to be thinking about, right? A lot of this is going to be reflective of those health issues that we spoke about. So of course, first is abortion access. What's happening at the larger state? Oh, good, now it's working, great. What's happening at the state, federal level, of course, but also when we think about even in states where it's legal, what's happening with parent involvement law? How are teens who want to receive access to abortion in states where it is not legal are not able to get access to another state because of driving, transportation costs to get there? There's a question in the chat. If you could put that in the Q&A, we'll be responding to that. And youth leadership is the end of it. So if you can see youth leadership and organizing, you're seeing the whole slide. Additionally, under abortion access, contraceptive access. So we're thinking about costs for youth, relationship with their provider. Again, is their provider providing that information appropriately? If they want something like long-acting reproductive contraception and any sort of minor outpatient surgery that's required for that, are they able to do that? It's important to know that teens just in general tend to face more barriers around preventing pregnancy and getting access. In addition to that, without comprehensive sex education, which is a little bit further down, if you don't know options exist, how can you ask for it? And if your provider is not telling you, how do you even know it's there? Another important area of reproductive justice advocacy, as we know was discussed very clearly in the discussion about reproductive justice, is racial justice and intersectionality, right? We know that Black youth, Indigenous youth, and immigrant youth are more likely to experience unintended pregnancies. And we know that there's a variety of reasons for that. That's not about these youth being bad. It's about societal circumstances, right? But we also know that when they seek reproductive care, when they decide to continue their pregnancies, they often have similar racial disparities in their maternal health outcomes and morbidity outcomes that their adults who are Black, brown, and immigrants would also experience. When they decide to move forward with an abortion plan, they often can, again, deal with more of these issues. And so we have to be thinking about them, whether they choose to continue with the pregnancy or not, as it relates to racial justice. Intersectionality is important as well, because when we're thinking about how race plays out along with being in a vulnerable group of adolescent, we also have to think about, are they also dealing with issues of sexual orientation, with gender identity? Are they someone who has a disability? Are they someone on the autism spectrum? Are they someone who is deaf, or a variety of ways in which they might have differences in ability? Are they in a societal context where they can really get access to this sort of treatment and support around navigating some of these issues? A lot of these things to think about include their individual qualities, so experiences, their own physical health, their own social demographic background, their family culture. Are family relationship and connected well, or are there challenges there? What do their peer networks look like, and what are the norms in their peer groups? And also in their community. So they could have all of those things, a good support system, a good peer support group, but if they don't have access in their communities to appropriate care, where are they going to get it? Access and confidentiality in healthcare, we talked about that a little bit as it relates to physical healthcare providers providing information, not having to have parental involvement. Are those organizations available to them? And can they talk about, with confidentiality, what they're experiencing? Increasingly, even with mental health care providers, there is a lot of push on them to not talk about abortion, or emotions coming up around wanting to make a decision around, should I continue a pregnancy or not? So even in the therapy office, these adolescents might not be able to get support around making these decisions. And so this is a big area that we need to focus on. And most importantly, we need to center youth in these leadership positions and organizing around reproductive rights and reproductive health care initiatives. Just like we talked about, if that is happening on the anti-abortion end, then we know on advocates for choice, we also need to be supporting youth leadership and organizing so that these efforts can really be led by the people who are impacted most. Okay, and then if you want to turn it over to complete your portion, Monique.
Absolutely. And so what else can we do, right? And it was a really good start. And so, there are always some additional things for us to do. First and foremost, a volunteer at a nonprofit organization that supports abortion access, that supports reproductive justice, and that is, my suggestion is a Planned Parenthood affiliate. In Philadelphia, there's the Abortion Liberation Fund. There's also the Gender Justice League, and those organizations provide money and access and information and resources and support. Donate to a reproductive justice. So volunteer is the first one, and donate is the second one. So donate to a similar reproductive justice, family planning, abortion access organization. And this is one of those situations where every little bit counts, right? So the first part of the volunteering is providing support to an individual that's going into an abortion clinic or a family planning clinic where there are people that are screaming obscenities and not being supportive, and being their support person and their source of comfort. The donation piece is these organizations are not funded, particularly federally funded, to provide abortions. And that's a belief that many people have. My federal dollars going toward abortion. And that's not necessarily true. Excuse me, those dollars come from foundations and generous donations. Please hold one moment. My office is really dry. And so donations, clearly, this is every bit counts. And we do have some discretionary funds. And so I remember being in one of my offices years ago, not that long ago, and talking about where donations can come from and what's the sacrifice of a donation. And I would have been happy at the organizations that I run for the donation to be the equivalent to the weekend party allowance, right? And we have a weekend party allowance, and we have a new shoe, shirt, dress, tie, pants, in the club and drinking and party allowance. One of those a month, 4 party weekend allowances a month. One of those would be really beneficial to some organizations. Vote, 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 and ask questions of our elected officials. And so when you're a working person, annually you have an appraisal or a performance evaluation, whatever your organization calls it. And that's an opportunity for your director, your manager, your leadership to provide you information on your performance for the year previous, and then to set you up with objectives to be successful in professional development for the next year. We can do the same things to our elected officials. We can communicate with them on their website or telephone or at the events that they're at. We can make sure that our elected officials and the decisions that they make are aligned with our personal decisions, because or else they're not speaking for the people in the way that they say that they are. Read and learn about history. And I have another book cover at the end of this presentation, but also, anything around reproductive justice, Loretta Ross's book and things. And so that you can understand the history, understand how we are here, where we are now, and then understand what the next steps are going to be. Get organized. And that was on a previous slide. Get organized. This movement that's coming up is going to come from not our generation. It's going to come from the Ys, the Zs, the Alphas, and then whatever is next after them. Push for comprehensive sexuality education in school. If people don't understand how to get pregnant, then definitely, and then you don't have access to contraceptive care and abortion access, then that's problematic as well. And if you look at the map of where the abortions are banned or where they're extraordinarily limited and overlay that with the United States map of which states provide comprehensive sex education, the result will be scary. Because many of those same states that are banning abortions also ban comprehensive sex education. And that's just going to be a mix of a very nasty tasting soup. And then engage in reproductive justice conversations with your friends, with your peers, with your classmates, with your professors, integrated in the questions that you ask in class, challenge people around their belief systems, and have these conversations, particularly with those where you will be providing some additional information or education. And then there are some times when sometimes I just say nothing because the fight is too big and it's like moving a brick wall, and I just move on to other people and gather more people together, so I'm not the only one that's having the conversation with the opposition, and however you define the opposition. And lastly, here's yet just another book, Birthing Justice, Black Women, Pregnancy, and Childbirth. So that's all part of the education, and how do we consume as much information as we possibly can so that we can arm ourselves. And this is a great opportunity. It's a lot of information that we went through this evening, and this is a great space for us to have questions, comments, and engage in a conversation. Do you want me to stop sharing, Ryan?
Yes, that would be, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dr. Howard. Thank you so much, Shanna. So Ryan, you have been monitoring the Q&A. Ryan is our, again, graduate assistant for the EPIC grant. So I think take it away, Ryan.
Hooray. Thank you both so much for this presentation. I think it was really amazing. I think the fact that we don't have 100 questions is actually more indicative of how thoroughly you covered the topic than anything else. But I want to start with like the really simple questions, which is, what was that name of the last book that you were just talking about?
I might be able to do that. Birthing Justice, Black Women, Pregnancy, and Childbirth. Do I have access to everyone in the chat? No, I just hosts and panelists. So I'll repeat it again. Birthing Justice, Black Women, Pregnancy, and Childbirth.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Howard. The next question is, can you guys provide some names of organizations that center youth in the conversations about reproductive rights?
Go ahead. I was going to say Advocates for Youth is a really great organization that really does center youth voices and the needs of youth.
There, and then always Planned Parenthood, like that's generally the first place I go, but definitely Advocates for Youth as well. And then I think that as we recognize that we are going to be relying on the youth for the struggle again, that there will be spaces in other family planning organizations that are local, depending upon where an individual is.
Perfect. Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment. Dr. Howard, you commented on how important it is to volunteer our time, and I can just say that sometimes on Saturday mornings I teach at 8th and Market Streets, and I'll park in this parking lot that's really, really close to a place where folks are accessing reproductive care of all kinds. And I've noticed in probably like the last year or so that there's been just this enormous uptick and swell of just sort of like this really just angry ire and heckling. And there's always a few escorts and people that are there that can kind of accompany these folks into these settings. And that is just, I think, incredible work, and probably we need more people. I mean, I've considered doing that too, but it's sort of right there. Anyway, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, I remember in front of the Planned Parenthood on, is that Chestnut and 12th or 13th, there was a man, and I would go in for meetings or whatever, and there was a man that would stand outside and just say, "Don't go in there." And that's what he would say. And that was years ago. And then most recently, a couple of years ago, I went back to Planned Parenthood, I was having a meeting, and there was like a similar type person standing outside. And I said to them, like, what are you doing about him? Oh, he is harmless. And that's fine for the people on the inside to say that that person is harmless. But I don't know if the person that needs the services on that day, when you had all of your stuff together and your guts and your glory together to walk into Planned Parenthood for any service, is that what you want to hear when you're walking in the door? Don't go in there, very ominous and such. So escorts are always needed in places. Yes.
Awesome. Someone would like to know where you find that the Jackson movie that you showed the trailer for. They would like to find and watch that movie. Me too. So
let's see if I can go back. Do you know offhand, Shanna?
The website? On the website, I was looking for like, how do you see it? And there's something there to purchase it, but there's got to be another way. Aside from Google being your friend, to try to find it somewhere where it is being shown. I'm going to just pull up where I had that at. I believe it's just the website itself is jacksonthefilm.com.
Perfect.
Excuse me, I also froze for a moment there, Ryan, and I wanted to add something to the concept of volunteers. And because it might have came up while I was away, I was away in frozen land. First, I just wanted to reflect on, I remember those days when I worked at Planned Parenthood, walking through those crowds. It was really scary to be escorted by the police. And it made me think about, as we were just talking, the benefits also for folks who want to volunteer more individually and to offer more comprehensive care. So care before, during the procedure, and after, to consider the work of being an abortion doula. So these are birth workers who are trained to provide education, physical, and emotional supports for people who are having an abortion procedure. After someone has, first of all, a lot of people are confused about what to expect, even to prep people emotionally for walking through those crowds. That would be the role of an abortion doula. How to get access, where to get access, an abortion doula would support you. And also for the postpartum healing that people often don't think about. When someone gets an abortion, there is a period of time in which their body is healing and there's lots of fluids and pain and different things going on that can be somewhat short-lived and tolerable if you have good support. But when you're alone and maybe no one in your family even knows, it's really, really emotionally challenging. So there are some abortion doulas who also specifically focus on youth. So I wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you. That also, well, first I'm going to say someone in the chat or in the Q&A has informed us that the movie is actually available for streaming on HBO. So
awesome.
Stream away. That being said, that was a perfect transition. So one of our questions is, Are there any doctors like in the Philadelphia area who really specialize and focus on adolescents in this area?
Yes. Names specifically, I can't say because I don't name specifically, but you know, we have CHOP, who is, you know, a center focused on reproductive health at the Children's Hospital here in Philadelphia. But private practitioners, I'm not aware of. Shanna?
I'm not unfortunately aware of off the top of my head, but I just had another thought about organization that would be someone that youth could connect with to find out information. And they're, I want to say their name correctly. It's New Voices for Reproductive Justice. And I know that they really center their work around youth and offering support around getting access to abortion care with supportive and culturally competent professionals.
Perfect. So then our next question is, do you guys have recommended resources for competent abortion counseling and like culturally sensitive abortion counseling?
I was going to share, when I saw that question, I was thinking about two organizations. exhaleprovoice.org is free counseling available to folks who have had an abortion. And they also have some resources for providers, but people can call and get access to immediate support. And also they have support groups that run virtually. But there also is another organization called all-options.org. And they do a very similar thing for folks who have just found out they're pregnant, trying to figure out what to do. And they can offer options counseling, but they also have definitely support for if you have had an abortion and you need support afterwards. They have free, I believe it's free, training available for providers who want to know how to have these conversations in a sensitive way as well.
Great. I think that sort of somewhat gets into the like mental health resources for youth going through this as well. So the last question that I have on here right now, questions keep popping up, which is great. So she says, you know, many anti-abortion folks say just put the baby up for adoption. So what this person wants to know is if you would briefly address like some of the issues surrounding adoption and like the dialogue there.
First and foremost, there are tens of thousands of babies that are put up for adoption daily that no one's adopting. And so we've had an issue with children in foster care and children and that are, you know, available for adoption, and no one is, you know, adopting those babies. So then to add to them the babies that are to be carried, even though they wanted the parents wanted to abort, it's going to put a larger strain on our child welfare system that is already incredibly strained. That's not a viable option. And it is clear that when people say that, they have no idea what they're talking about. They have no respect for family. They have no respect for the system. You know, if people are already complaining about where my taxpayer dollars go and how I don't want to pay for whatever, then certainly if you're going to add 20,000 children in addition to the tens of thousands a day, there's just absolutely no space. And it's clear the person is out of touch. That's not a viable option.
It's not a viable option. You're absolutely right. And the adoption process is very complicated and convoluted, particularly in the United States. But I cannot speak to this better than the voices of adoptees who have said that this is a very offensive approach to take as it relates to the anti-abortion argument. I want to just read a quote that I just saw from, it was reposted by a queer birth worker who is an amazing person to follow around inclusive birth work support. but they reposted this topic, and this is from a person who is an adoptee who said, adoption is an alternative to parenting, not abortion. Adoption is not the solution to abortion. Adoption is more traumatic than beautiful. A loving family doesn't change that. Seeing "I'll take your baby if you just want to get an abortion" all over the internet is actually traumatizing for adoptees. And if you're still talking about adoption in your arguments, you're not listening to adoptees who have said that this is really offensive. And so essentially what they have shared is that they feel like they've just become a pawn in the pro-life, pro-choice argument, when it really is not a solution to dealing with folks who are having these challenges. And instead, it actually is emotionally harmful to people who have been adopted. So I would encourage folks who have thought about that or used that as a discussion point to really rethink that.
Yes. So our next question is sort of off in a different direction. So who offers doula adoption training in Philadelphia?
I know that at Penn, there's a couple of organizations that do birthing, but not the abortion doula services. So I don't know. Yeah, but Shanna, you know.
I was going to say that just to clarify, often what you would be looking for if you were interested in abortion doula work is a full spectrum doula. And those trainings can be provided, many of these trainings are provided virtually, so people are able to access them from their home. But there are some organizations in kind of traveling distance that do that, but there's some really amazing organizations like Ancient Song in New York that offer really amazing full spectrum doula trainings. Birth Arts, BADT, Birth Arts Development. What did that stand for? Let me not quote people. Let me say, do a good search for full spectrum doula training. And that is where you will start to see it. There's some really amazing organizations that do it. It is very common at this point for people to get doula training virtually, and then to connect with other doulas in their area around support, around how to begin reaching out to do that sort of volunteer work. Also, for people who might not want the full before and after support, but are interested in being present in the room with someone as they go through an abortion procedure, organizations, I don't know if Planned Parenthood still does it, they probably do, but they offer companion trainings so that you can come in and be one of their hired companions to walk people in the door through the protesters, be there with them during the procedure, and just be emotional support for them while they're in that space.
Birthing Advocacy Doula Training.
Thank you, Sabia Wade. She's so amazing. I'm sorry I got that incorrect.
Well, thank you both very much. That covers all of our questions for tonight. So I'm going to turn this back over to Julie.
Thank you, Brian. This is so important. This is such important work, and we're really grateful for you tonight, just to kind of shed some light on this. So